Hello, my name is Laura James and I'm a children's author, and I'm really pleased to have been asked by the Hexham Book Festival to tell you a little bit about my latest Fabio book, which is Peril at Lizard Lake. For those of you who don't know, Fabio is the world's greatest flamingo detective, and he has a wonderful sidekick called Gilbert, who's a giraffe. So I thought I'd just read you the first chapter to give you a taste of the book, if you're sitting comfortably. In a small town on the banks of Lake Lalusi lives the world's greatest flamingo detective. His name is Fabio. He's not tall or strong, but slight and pink, and he's very, very clever. At his side for every case is his friend and associate Gilbert, a giraffe terrible at the art of disguise, but good at asking questions, sometimes even the right ones. Chapter 1. Fabio walked wearily down Plume Street towards his office. The delights of his neighbourhood did not interest him that day. He trudged up the stairs of his detective agency headquarters and entered to find Gilbert with his feet on the desk, reading the paper. Gilbert quickly put his feet back down on the floor. "Please tell me there's something interesting in that pile," said Fabio, gesturing to an untidy stack of papers on Gilbert's desk. "Slim pickings, I'm afraid," replied Gilbert. "There's a case of a missing umbrella." Gilbert handed over the letter doubtfully. Fabio skim-read it and sighed. "Reply to Mr. Wilde, suggesting that as he thinks he lost his umbrella on the bus, he might like to return to the depot and ask if it has been handed into the lost and found." "Righto," said Gilbert, making a note. "What about that one?" asked Fabio, glancing over at a scrap of paper. "That was a telephone message," said Gilbert. "I think we must be listed incorrectly in the directory, because everyone who's rung up seems to need a plumber, not a detective." "Bring, bring!" "That'll be another one," said Gilbert, rolling his eyes. Then, in his best telephone voice, "Office of the world's greatest flamingo detective, Gilbert speaking. How may I help you?" Fabio took a stack of letters through to his office while Gilbert dealt with the inquiry. From the outer office, he could hear Gilbert on the phone. His conversation sounded promising. "Excellent! I'll head straight over. Thank you. Goodbye." Gilbert bounded into Fabio's office with a broad grin on his face. Fabio stood up eagerly. "A new case fit for the world's greatest flamingo detective?" "Well, no, not exactly," said Gilbert, a little crestfallen, "but I think you're going to like it. Something very exciting has just arrived. How would you like a day out of the office?" "That sounds like a splendid idea," replied Fabio, reaching for his hat. "Lead the way, my friend." It wasn't long before they were racing through the streets of Lalusi in Gilbert's sports car. Gilbert was bursting to tell Fabio the surprise. He wasn't very good at keeping secrets, so it was taking quite a lot of effort not to give the game away. They took the road out of town for about a mile and then swung left onto a dirt track. Fabio shut his eyes and held onto his hat until the car came to a stop. "I bet you can't guess where we are," said Gilbert, barely containing his excitement. Fabio opened his eyes. "An airfield," he said decisively. "How on earth did you guess that?" asked Gilbert, forgetting that Fabio is something of an expert at making educated guesses. "It was easy," replied Fabio. "Flat land, a big shed that could easily be an aircraft hangar, and finally," he said, pointing, "a windsock." "Oh," sighed Gilbert, "nothing gets past you. Well, you'll never guess what I've just bought." "A submarine?" asked Fabio with a twinkle in his eye. "No, that would be—" "Oh, ha ha, very funny," replied Gilbert, realising he was being teased. "Is it a plane, my friend?" "Well, as a matter of fact it is," said Gilbert. "Do you want to come and see it?" Gilbert proudly led Fabio to the hangar and pulled back the doors to reveal a small silver biplane. "Isn't she a beauty?" he said, grinning. "I'm calling her Angel. Here, grab some goggles and hop in." With Gilbert's help, Fabio climbed onto the wing and then into the front seat of the plane. Once he was safely strapped in, Gilbert took his place in the pilot's seat. "I didn't know you'd flown in one of these before," said Fabio. "Well, I haven't exactly," confessed Gilbert, "but the stork who sold it to me taught me the basics, forward, up, down, that sort of thing. He flew her in from the Coral Coast this morning. That was him calling the office. He said it's all very simple, really. Logical, even. You'll like it, Fabio, I promise." Gilbert started the engines. "Ready?" "What, you mean—" But Fabio's voice was drowned out by the sound of the propellers starting, and before he knew what was happening, they were taxiing out of the hangar. At the top of the runway, Gilbert tapped Fabio on the shoulder and gave him the thumbs up. Despite himself, Fabio did the same. But as Gilbert increased the the throttle and they prepared for takeoff, Fabio suddenly yearned for that quiet day in the office. Their plane bumped off the ground once, and then again. The end of the runway and some very tall trees were rapidly getting closer. "Up she goes!" cheered Gilbert, oblivious of any danger, and their little plane took to the air. "Well, that wasn't too difficult," he commented as Fabio noticed the wheels clipping branches below them. "I won't try anything fancy like a loop-the-loop on our first trip out," shouted Gilbert over the noise of the engine as he levelled the plane. "That's very good of you, Gilbert," Fabio called back, but to his surprise he was enjoying himself. The savannah stretched out below them. It was mostly lush grassland with the occasional settlement. The reflection of the morning sun twinkled on a tiny river as it meandered towards La Lucy. Brian, shush. Hey! Fabio hadn't realised that flying would suit him so well. He was about to tell Gilbert how much fun he was having when the engine spluttered. "What was that?" he asked. Nothing," called Gilbert, frantically looking at the instruments in front of him for clues. The engine spluttered again. "Gilbert? Did the stork who sold you the plane refuel after flying all the way from the Coral Coast?" Fabio yelled. Gilbert's eyes finally found the fuel gauge just as the engine stopped completely. "It appears we have run out of fuel," Gilbert shouted, but there was no need to, as they were suddenly flying in eerie silence. "Well, at least we can hear each other properly," he joked, trying to stay positive. "Didn't you check the fuel gauge before we took off?" asked Fabio. "I didn't know I was supposed to," replied Gilbert weakly. "How did you think it stayed up in the air?" As if on cue, the nose of the plane started to dive. "Pull up!" shouted Fabio as panic began to set in. Gilbert wrestled the plane into a glide, but they were rapidly losing altitude. Fabio scanned the ground below, looking for a safe place to land. "There," he said, pointing to a clearing. "I see it!" shouted Gilbert as the ground got closer and closer. Gilbert tried his best to follow Fabio's instructions and guide the small plane towards his suggested landing site. It wasn't easy. "Hold tight!" he called out as they connected with the ground. They bounced on touchdown before hitting the earth a second time, wing first. As it scraped along the ground, sparks flying, the wing acted as a brake, and finally they stopped. "Thank goodness this clearing was here," said Gilbert cheerfully. Eventually the dust settled and Fabio opened his eyes. He removed his goggles and looked around, a chill running down his spine. They were being watched. That's the end. I'm sorry about the noises off. That is Brian and Florence, my dogs, playing on the lawn. They're very barky. I hope you're all well and enjoying yourselves as much as you can in lockdown and hopefully getting some good reading done. And hope to see you soon. Lots of love. Bye.